1432, December 18, 1944. The winter air at RAF Leiston carried the sharp bite of burnt oil and cold metal, drifting through the open hangar where mechanics hammered, clattered, and cursed under their breath. Boots scraped across concrete, engines rumbled in the distance, and in the middle of it all, Captain Chuck Yeager walked slowly toward a battered Republic P-47 Thunderbolt that had been hauled back from a forced landing inside recently liberated territory in France. Frost clung to its aluminum skin. Its left wing bore deep compression wrinkles, physical scars from a dive that mechanics estimated had approached 500 miles per hour. Yeager rested a palm on the cold fuselage, feeling the rough, warped metal under his glove. The smell of hydraulic fluid and cordite hung heavy. He had flown the P-47 during training before transitioning to the P-51, but he had never seen one come back looking quite like this. What stunned him wasn't the damage, it was the fact that the wing had not torn off. Engineers had talked for months about compressibility, about the Thunderbird's terrifying tendency to lock its controls in steep dives, but seeing the aftermath this close felt different. It made the theories real. For Yeager, aircraft weren't just machines. They were puzzles, mechanical truths hidden under layers of engineering, waiting to be understood. And the P-47's dive behavior had become one of the biggest puzzles of the air war. Meanwhile, across the front, Thunderbolt pilots routinely reported surviving dives so steep that altimeters blurred and airframes groaned like living creatures. Some had punched through shockwave zones and lived to tell the tale. Others never pulled out. Every story added tension, fear, and respect to the legend of the heavyweight fighter that could fall from the sky faster than any German interceptor. Yeager motioned to a crew chief, asking how they recovered this particular aircraft. The man explained that ground troops had secured the area after the German retreat. The Thunderbolt had skidded across a frozen field, battered but intact, its pilot alive and swearing he'd exceeded every limit the Republic engineers had warned about. Yeager listened without interrupting, weighing every detail. How far could the P-47 actually be pushed? Why did some survive dives that should have shredded them in midair? And what did the engineers at Wright Field know that frontline pilots didn't? As Yeager circled the wing, sunlight revealed subtle distortions along the metal, near invisible clues that hinted at the enormous forces at play. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing. The Thunderbolt had a reputation, big, heavy, indestructible. But this was something else entirely. Something about this aircraft told him there was a deeper story hidden inside the dive that nearly tore it apart, and he intended to understand it. Yeager stepped back as engineers began removing access panels, their tools clicking sharply in the cold air. The interior ribs of the wing revealed a story far more dramatic than the crumpled skin on the outside. Several spars were bent, not broken. Rivets had stretched into oval shapes. The metal looked as if it had softened under pressure, even though Yeager knew it hadn't. The forces alone had distorted it. One engineer pointed at a stress line, whispering that this kind of deformation usually came from airflow shock waves forming along the wing, compressibility effects that Republic Aviation had warned about since 1943. At high speeds, as airflow neared the speed of sound, the P-47 could suddenly lose elevator authority. Controls would lock, the nose would tuck, and the fighter would simply keep falling. Few pilots ever forgot the first time it happened. Yeager had felt it himself during gunnery training months earlier. A gentle dive would become a steep plunge. The stick felt frozen and concrete. The altimeter unwound like a watch spring. Pilots described a clawing panic at that moment when they realized no amount of muscle could pull the nose up. Some blacked out, others prayed, a few never woke up. But this particular P-47 had done something extraordinary. The pilot survived because he kept his nerve and remembered that Republic test pilots had reported extending the dive flaps could disrupt the airflow just enough to regain control. It was a terrifying gamble at 25,000 feet, with the nose down and the world spinning toward you, yet it worked. Yeager kept returning to that detail. Why could the Thunderbolt handle such punishment? What secret strength was hidden in its massive frame? He studied the cross-section of the wing, thick, almost bulky compared to the Mustangs. He knew the P-47's roots came from pre-war air racing designs, built around durability, not elegance. Its massive radial engine and rugged construction meant the structure could endure forces that would snap most fighters clean in half. And its elliptical wing, though not sleek, was incredibly strong. A question hung in the air. Was the P-47's brute strength the reason so many pilots lived through dives that should have been fatal? That thought pulled Yeager deeper into the aircraft's story. He asked the engineers about recorded dive tests at Wright Field. They told him the Thunderbolt had reached over 550 miles per hour in controlled experiments, numbers the public rarely heard. The aircraft had technically broken into the transonic range years before the sound barrier was officially crossed. Yeager stepped away, the cold wind brushing across his face. He realized he wasn't just looking at a damaged fighter. He was looking at a key to understanding high-speed flight, something he suspected would define the future long after the war ended. As the afternoon light faded over Leiston, Yeager moved around the Thunderbolt one last time, taking in every detail of its battle-scarred frame. The hangar felt quieter now. The constant rhythm of tools had slowed. Mechanics gathered their notes, engineers wiped grease from their hands, and the cold seemed to settle into the concrete itself. Yet Yeager stayed locked in thought, staring at the wing as though it were speaking to him. He imagined the moment the pilot began that dive, enemy fire behind him, altimeter falling fast, the canopy rattling from the compression waves forming around the aircraft. At 30,000 feet, the P-47 would have sliced into the dive like a stone dropped into a well. The engine's roar would have deepened into a low, unearthly vibration. The pilot would feel the airframe tighten around him, every control stiffening. The ground would have rushed up in a blur. And right at the edge of structural failure, right when instinct screamed to pull, he trusted the engineering and deployed the dive flaps. The fact that the wings held, the fact that the fighter came home, that was the miracle Yeager now examined with his own hands. He crouched beside the landing gear, tapping a knuckle against the metal. The dull ring reminded him of how much punishment the Thunderbolt could absorb. This was the same aircraft that had escorted bombers through hellish flak barrages and survived ramming attempts, mid-air collisions, and engine failures. It was a machine that seemed carved from the war itself, unyielding, brutal, and almost impossibly resilient. Yeager straightened and looked toward the runway. The icy wind carried the distant hum of another flight spinning up, the sound rolling across the field like a promise of more battles to come. In that moment, Yeager understood that the P-47 had taught him something no manual, no briefing, no classroom could offer. It showed him what happened to metal, air, and human instinct at the very edge of physics, where control ended and survival depended on calm hands and faith in engineering. Years later, when Yeager pushed the Bell X-1 toward the sound barrier, he would draw from lessons learned long before the orange rocket plane ever left the ground. Lessons learned from battered wings, compressed metal, and pilots who trusted their aircraft through fear that few could imagine. As the hangar doors closed behind him, Yeager carried a final thought. The story of the Thunderbolt wasn't just about a fighter surviving a dive. It was about those moments in war when knowledge born from danger shaped the future of flight. Moments that still echo in every jet streaking across our skies today. And perhaps that's why stories like this endure. They remind us how courage, engineering, and human curiosity met in the crucible of World War II. If viewers feel that connection, the tension, the bravery, the innovation, they're invited to share what struck them most about the P-47's legacy.